my concerns is I wonder if there's going to be a reduction or a review of what's cost effective differently from comparative effectiveness, but if there's going to be cost restrictions, is that going to impede research? And it's a question I ponder over a lot. Is technology going to be retarded? And that's just a fear and a feeling I have, and I may be alone in this, but I am throwing it out there. That's my concern for the future of cancer research. If drugs and technology won't be totally accessible, then will the incentive to perpetuate and promote new technologies be any lessened?
So if we think about the future of cancer research, I think the conversation about who responds to what treatment gets very interesting. That relates to cost, because we will be looking at a smaller and smaller subset who will respond to a particular treatment. Then does it become an incentive? Is there an incentive for pharmaceutical companies to develop a drug that actually will only impact a smaller group of people? I know melanoma, I'm with the Melanoma Research Foundation, is at least 20 different diseases. They sequenced of one melanoma tumor and had 30,000 mutations in it. So this is very, very complicated. It's going to impact costs. But there's another issue, I think, certainly in melanoma, and I think in cancer in general. The consensus is that we need to be looking at combination therapies. So if you think about the future of cancer research, it will not be a single silver bullet for a particular cancer, but a combination of 2 or maybe 3 different things working together. That's not as easy as developing a single drug, particularly if you don't have an approved drug. If you're looking at 2 different drugs that are in development, and particularly if those drugs are owned by different companies, this is what will be the answer for patients. And yet making that happen will encounter months, if not years, of delay simply because of the regulatory landscape. This is what I worry about in terms of cancer research in the future. We need to find a way to get past that.
In terms of the future of cancer research, I think really what it comes down to is resources and money. And if we're going to fund research, we need money. I just read an interesting article, it was either in Newsweek or Business Week, that Diane actually sent to me, that was in Newsweek, that talked about the future of cancer. And the federal government, obviously the levels of funding have remained relatively stable with inflation, and that organizations in biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies are now looking to private foundations to provide this sort of money. Something that we do at the LRF is we do fund research, but clearly, I'm just throwing it out there to the group, we clearly need to be working to educate our elected officials as well as to the need for the increase in federal funding, especially for, in my case, a disease like lymphoma. So we do try to do that each year, but it's incremental group. If all cancers could come together and try to advocate to all of our elected officials to increase federal funding for cancer research, I think it would be advantageous. I mean, that's how they were so successful with AIDS.
I think that if we are going to see more cost efficiency and advance the research, we're going to need to see a lot of reform and change at the FDA, because the fact of the matter is, when you look at the future of cancer research, when you look at the future of targeted therapy, we are going to see subsets of patients with a dramatic response to certain therapies. And unfortunately, the FDA still doesn't want to look at subset data. We have pharmaceutical companies who are taking their drugs for review outside of this country to other countries to have their drugs reviewed, where they will look at subset data. The future of cancer treatment and research is going to be subset data. That's what targeted therapy is going to be all about. So I think if we're going to see some of the kind of advances you're talking about, if we're going to look for cost efficiencies in reforming how we're doing research, we're going to need to advocate for some dramatic changes at the FDA.
All of these recommendations to really expedite this process, and the bureaucracy involved in this process, and the 800 and something days it takes to move through this process. But we still do have all of these attitudinal issues on all of the sides of clinical trials that make people reluctant to participate, and often providers reluctant to put people on clinical trials.
I think so much comments that are made in these sessions are anecdotal and not science and not evidence-based. We sort of discount that anything has been done over the years, yet all the organizations, many of here, are overburdened with the amount of survivors or consumers, or whatever you want to call them out there, who are going to need care and are living good quality of lives for longer. Again, certain cancers have more problems or more problematic in terms of cures and treatments. But there's been a lot of success. I think we just have to keep that in perspective.
I just want to respond, Eric. I spent 18 months on the Institute of Medicine committee that issued the psychosocial report about the need for psychosocial services for people with cancer. It was issued in 2007, November of 2007. And what I took out of that report, I think more than anything, is what I use as a slide when I present it, and what's in the report is, not to let perfect be the enemy of good, because everything we came up with in that report, there was a reason you couldn't do it. You didn't have the money, you didn't have the support, the healthcare team didn't want it, people were too far away from it, they had too many other things on their plate. I mean, it's really kind of what we're hearing now. I think we all have great ideas about what we want to have done and what the ideal is, but we do live in this unfortunate world of reality where many of these things don't happen.
We've been talking all about patients, and that assumes that you're talking about people who have been diagnosed with cancer. How do you integrate what I think is a very important part of this whole continuum, which is prevention and early detection, into this whole shift of paradigm and the new value proposition?
I think you're absolutely right that to the extent that we can do prevention, early detection, and find ways to prevent cancer from happening, that's a primary effort that ought to be taking place. That's in the entire continuum, but in part one of the reasons I'm not talking about it as effectively right now is that the mission was to talk about the transition from patient to survivorship, and I think that was the fundamental focus for the conversation. That doesn't mean we don't believe, and I don't think that prevention's important. I do. Having lost a mother to lung cancer, I think tobacco control is one of the most important things that we can do, and obesity is something that we ought to do something about. And if we, like I think we discussed last night, if the 3 interventions that we know, screening procedures that we know prevent cancer could be broadly implemented, that would make a significant difference overall in the prevention of cancer. My focus at NCCS is primarily on care, and so we hope to have a lot less people to care for, but we want that care to be high quality.